8 days. That's how long my grandson and I were gone. 8 days at a rented cabin on Lake Erie, the same trip we take every August since his grandfather died. And when we walked back into my own house on a Sunday evening with sand still in our shoes, his bedroom was stripped down to the bare floorboards. Not a bed, not a shelf, not a nail in the wall, just 4 square dents in the carpet pad where the train table had stood for 2 years, like footprints somebody had left behind on purpose. My sister was standing in the doorway holding a paint chip, and she laughed. She actually laughed, and she said, "I took the room, I sold everything, got a real good price too." My mother came up behind her drying a glass with a dish towel, and she said, "Skylar's a teenage girl, honey. She needs a real room. Blood before boxes." My grandson took a fistful of my sleeve and pushed his face into my side, and I felt him shaking before I heard him crying. And I said nothing at all. I just took his hand and walked out of my own front door. But by the first snow that year, my sister wasn't laughing anymore. My mother was packing her own boxes, and every single person in my family finally found out what my quiet had been holding up for 38 years. Not one of them saw the first domino fall. I did. I'm the one who pushed it. Welcome back to the channel. This is where we tell the stories the family hoped would stay in the family. Stories about patience, about betrayal, and about the exact minute the patience ran out. If any part of this one lands in a sore spot, tell me in the comments, and go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because there's more where this came from. My name is Margaret. Everybody calls me Maggie. I'm 58 years old, and I've worked in the Ross County Recorder's office in Chillicothe, Ohio for 26 years. That's deeds, liens, easements, chain of title. My whole working life has been one question asked 10,000 different ways. Who actually owns this, and can you prove it on paper? Remember that. It matters later. To tell this right, I have to start with Gene. My husband was a lineman for the Rural Electric Co-op for 31 years. He was the kind of man who'd climb a pole in an ice storm at 2 a.m. to get an old woman's furnace running again, and then stop at the gas station on the way home to buy me a bad cup of coffee and a scratch-off ticket because he thought that was romance. 2 winters ago, he came in off a 14-hour restoration call, sat down in his own kitchen chair to take his boots off, and had a heart attack right there. He was 60. He never got the second boot off. I did CPR on my own husband on my own kitchen linoleum for 11 minutes before the squad got there, and I can tell you now without my voice going sideways that it didn't matter. Some things are already decided before you start. Now Charlie. Charlie is my grandson. He came to live with me when he was 5, after my daughter Bridget died of a brain aneurysm at a bus stop on a Tuesday morning, with no more warning than a light bulb going out. His father was a phone number that stopped working sometime around Charlie's 2nd birthday. So it was Gene and me, and then it was just me. Charlie's 9. He's quiet like his grandpa was. He's patient like his grandpa was. He notices things nobody else notices, and he saves them up for later. And after Gene died, that boy built his entire world inside one bedroom at the back of my house. That room was our museum. Gene's navy peacoat hung on the closet door, the wool still smelling like him if you got close enough. Gene's father's Elgin pocket watch sat in a locked cedar trunk, the initials scratched into the case back by a man who died before I was born. Gene's tool chest was under the window, red, dented, 40 years of his handwriting on masking tape labeled. And on a 4x8 sheet of plywood in the middle of that room sat the Ohio and Erie line. That's what they called it, Gene and Charlie, a model railroad hand-built board by board. Gene's own father had started it in 1948 with a brass Lionel locomotive he bought with his mustering out pay, and that locomotive had been sitting in a box in my attic for 30 years until Charlie turned 7, and Gene brought it down and set it on the kitchen table and said, "Well, look what I found." They laid track. They built a hillside out of plaster and newspaper. Gene cut a trestle bridge by hand out of basswood, 61 little timbers, and he let Charlie glue every one. They wired it in sections because Gene did everything the right way even when nobody was watching. And they made a deal. They shook on it in my kitchen, like 2 grown men closing on a house. On Charlie's 10th birthday, the Ohio and Erie would run all the way around, full loop, whistle and all. Gene died with the loop still open, about 18 inches of track short, right where the bridge was supposed to land. After the funeral, Charlie asked me if the deal still counted. I said, "Yes, baby, it counts." So we worked on it. A half hour here, a Saturday morning there, Two people who didn't know what they were doing following a dead man's pencil mark. It was the slowest railroad ever built in the state of Ohio, and it was the only clock that mattered in my house, which is exactly why what happened to it still wakes me at 4 in the morning. Now let me tell you about the rest of the household, and about the rule I was raised under. 3 years ago, my mother, Dolores, everybody calls her Dee, had her hip replaced at 77, and the money ran out about the same time her balance did. So I converted my sewing room into a bedroom and moved her in. She watched Charlie after school. I covered her supplements, her phone, her car insurance, and the canyon between her Social Security check and the actual price of being alive in this country. That arrangement had a name in our family, and the name was Meg. I've been the strong one since I was about 11 years old, which is when my father's drinking got expensive and somebody had to make sure my little sister had a coat that fit. In my family, being capable is not a virtue, it's a diagnosis. There's no treatment, there's only more chores. My father passed a long time ago, and after that my mother's arithmetic got real simple. Whatever the family needed, the family took from whoever had it, and the one who had it was me. I want to be fair to her, because fair matters to me in a way it never once mattered to them. My mother was not a cruel woman. She never raised a hand to me in her life. She just believed all the way down in her bones that a family is a bucket line, and the strong daughter stands closest to the well. She had a saying for it, blood before boxes, meaning people matter more than things, meaning your things aren't really yours if somebody's blood needs them more. She said it over Thanksgiving turkeys and at funerals and across the hoods of broken-down cars for 40 years, and for 40 years, I passed every single bucket they handed me and called it love. Then there's my sister, Tammy, 11 years younger than me, 47 years old, and permanently owed something by somebody. For me, the rules were poured concrete. For Tammy, the rules were a rubber band. I'd known that since I was a girl. I just never once imagined how far a rubber band could stretch in 8 days with my back turned. That spring, Tammy's second marriage came apart the way a paper bag comes apart in the rain, and she landed on my porch in June with 2 garbage bags and an opening offer. Just a few weeks, Mags. Just till I get on my feet. I said no. I want that on the record because people love to ask me why I didn't see this coming. I saw it coming. In my family, a few weeks is a unit of measurement that means forever. I had 3 bedrooms and 3 people in them, and I had a 9-year-old boy whose entire sense of safety in this world was nailed to the floor of one back bedroom, so I said no. And then I drove her over to a place on Western Avenue and paid her first month and her deposit out of my own account, $890, because saying no in my family costs money. My mother didn't speak to me at supper for 6 days. When she finally did, she said, "Your sister is blood," in the tone you'd use to correct somebody's grammar. And I did more than say no. This is the part that keeps me up. I put a little brass padlock on the cedar trunk where the watch and the coat and the good photographs lived. I got a price on rekeying the front door. $90 for 4 locks, the man said, and I wrote it on the pad by the phone. And then Charlie got strep, and the water heater went, and August came, and my mother lived in my house, and you cannot lock your own mother out of the house she sleeps in. So the spare key to that trunk stayed exactly where our spare keys have always stayed. Junk drawer, left of the stove, under the rubber bands and the dead batteries. I told myself the padlock was mostly a message anyway. One more thing. At the time it meant nothing to me at all. Tammy started hitting the little heart button on half the furniture listings on our county's online yard sale page. Daybeds, vanities, dressers, full-length mirrors, and I thought, well, good. She's setting up her place on a budget. I understood those hearts about 6 weeks later. She wasn't shopping. She was pricing. Every August since Jean died, Charlie and I drive up to Marblehead on Lake Erie and rent the same little cabin with the sagging porch. There's a spot near the lighthouse where Jean proposed to me in 1989 with a ring he'd made payments on for a year. We bring 2 orange pops up there, and we sit on the rocks, and we tell him about our year. It's the 1 week out of 52 where I'm not carrying anybody. This past August we were gone 8 days. We came home on a Sunday around supper time, sunburned and easy, arguing about whether we had enough bread for grilled cheese. Charlie ran ahead of me down the hall the way he always did, straight to his room. And then he stopped in the doorway and didn't make one single sound. I want you to understand something. I've heard children scream, That silence was worse than any scream I have ever heard in my life. The room was empty, his bed gone, the dresser jean refinished, gone, the bookshelf, the lamp, the rug, the cedar trunk with the brass padlock on it, gone out of the closet, and everything that had been locked inside it gone with it. And the plywood, the whole 4x8 sheet, the Ohio and Erie line, Hills and Track, and Jean's hand-cut trestle bridge that was gone down to the last thumbtack. In the corner where it had stood was a brand-new white day bed with the tag still hanging off it. And on the wall above it, somebody had hung one of those paper letter garlands. It spelled out S-K-Y Lar. My sister came out of the hall bathroom holding a paint chip up to the light. Sage green, I remember. She smiled at me. "Where are my grandson's things?" I asked. And Tammy laughed. Actually laughed. "I took the room, sold everything, got a real good price too. And then, like she was doing me a kindness, half of it was junk anyway, Mags." From the kitchen doorway, my mother said, drying a glass, calm as a Tuesday, "Skylar's coming back to live with her mother. A 16-year-old girl needs a real room, honey. Blood before boxes." Charlie had a handful of my sleeve. I could feel his whole body going. And I looked at my sister smile and my mother's dish towel, and what I heard in that hallway was 3 generations of buckets going down a line. And I said exactly one thing, and I did not say it to them. "Hit your bag, buddy. We're going next door." I took my grandson's hand, and I walked out of my own house. My mother watched me go without one flicker of worry on her face, because she thought my quiet meant yes. She had 38 years of evidence for that. She was wrong by about one night. Eileen Prosser has lived next to me for 19 years. Retired postmaster, widow, hard of hearing in one ear, and the sharpest woman in that township. She didn't ask a single question at the door. She made Charlie a grilled cheese and turned on a show about wolves and sat with him while he ate about 4 bites of it. And then he started going down the list, that flat little voice checking items off his own life. "Is my bed gone?" "Yes." "Is Grandpa's coat gone?" "Yes." "Is his watch gone?" I told him I didn't know yet, but I thought so. And then he got to the end of the list, and he looked up at me and he said, "We never ran her all the way around." That was the whole sentence. He didn't cry when he said it. He said it flat, like a man checking a fact. Then he turned back to the wolves, and I went into Eileen's kitchen and held on to the edge of her counter for a while with my eyes shut. After he fell asleep, I sat up at that kitchen table and did what I've done at work for 26 years when a title doesn't clear. I went back through the file slowly, line by line. And about halfway down, I stopped cold, because I hit a detail with edges on it. The cedar trunk had a padlock on it, a little brass one, and the only key on my ring was in my purse, and my purse had been in a cabin 180 miles away for 8 days, which meant somebody went into that junk drawer, dug under the rubber bands, found the spare, and opened that trunk on purpose. That is not a woman clearing out a room in a hurry. That is somebody standing in front of a dead man's belongings, using a key, and making a decision. I slept about 3 hours. Then I went home to ask my questions. Monday morning I walked back across my own yard and into my own kitchen, and I tried it their way exactly one time, because I needed to know precisely who I was dealing with before I decided what to do about them. I kept my voice flat and pleasant, the voice I use with people who come to my counter angry about an easement. I said I wanted 2 things, a list of every buyer and whatever money was left, so I could start buying my grandson's life back. Tammy looked at me like I'd asked her to return a borrowed casserole dish. "It was old furniture, Maggie. Honestly, you should thank me. That room was a shrine, and it wasn't healthy for him." I asked about the peacoat, the watch, the tool chest, the trains. She shrugged one shoulder. "Dead man's stuff. Dead men don't need shelves." My mother came in on the tail end of that and started smoothing it over the way other people sweep up broken glass, brisk without looking down. She had a solution already. Charlie could sleep on the pull-out in the front room until Skylar got settled. Children adapt, and someday the cousins would all laugh about this. I stood there watching the 2 of them arrange my grandson's childhood like patio furniture, and I asked my one real question. "How much?" Tammy blinked. "What?" "How much did you get for all of it?" She did the math in the air, and I swear to you, she looked proud, like 1,100, a little more. And before you ask, it's spent. Skylar needed a bed and clothes, and I had to put down on the electric. I nodded. And I wrote that number down on the whiteboard in my head, time-stamped, exact. The way I've recorded 10,000 instruments of conveyance, $1,100. Then I told my sister to take her daybed and be out of my house by supper. She went, slammed my storm door hard enough to rattle the glass. My mother followed her out to the car, saying, "This wasn't over, honey. This isn't over." They watched me nod quietly, and they figured they'd won. Nodding quietly is what I have done my entire life. Neither one of them had the first idea what I do with numbers. That night, with Charlie asleep in Aline's spare room again, I opened my laptop and went to my sister's profile on that county yard sale page. And there it all was. My grandson's bedroom, laid out in a grid under her smiling little profile picture like a rummage sale nobody told me about. 16 listings. Boy's bed frame, $60, solid wood dresser, $90, bookshelf, $20, vintage navy peacoat, size 44, $45, and in the photograph you could still see the loose button I'd been meaning to sew back on for 2 years. Old pocket watch, works, $70. $70 for an Elgin with a dead man's father's initials scratched into the case back. I did not throw that laptop. I want you to know that, because I wanted to. Instead, I did what 26 years behind a records counter trains you to do. I got methodical. Screenshot. Save. Next. Screenshot. Save. Next. Every listing. Every timestamp. Every chirpy little description she typed out while I was sitting on a rock by a lighthouse telling my husband we'd had a gentle year. Then I went and pulled the folder I never wanted to open again. When Jean died, the insurance company had me inventory the house. Photographs, model numbers, serial numbers. And because that brass locomotive was a 1948 original, we carried a scheduled rider on it for years, with a written appraisal from a dealer up in Columbus. $900, dated, signed, notarized. I matched 16 listings against my own records, line by line, the way I reconcile a chain of title. Then I built a folder on my desktop, and I named it Charlie's Room in capital letters. It was almost peaceful in an awful way. It was the first true thing anybody had done in that house in 8 days. And then, at the bottom of her profile, I found the 17th listing. Grayed out, marked sold, and my hands stopped moving on the keys. The photo had been taken outside, at an angle, on my own front porch. Old model train setup needs work. $20. I did not click it that night. I couldn't. Tuesday I called the non-emergency line on my lunch break, standing out behind the courthouse annex where nobody could hear me say it out loud. My sister sold my grandson's belongings while we were out of town. The officer was polite and tired. He asked who lived in the home. I said I own it. My mother lives with me. My sister does not. He asked if my sister had ever stayed there, had a key, got mail there. He used the phrase, family situation. And then he said the words I'd already read on 3 legal websites at 4 a.m, so I knew they were coming before he finished. Ma'am, this one sounds civil. Family property disputes usually are. Now here's the thing about working in records. You don't argue with the counter. You learn what a filing needs in order to be accepted, so I didn't cry into that phone and I didn't hang up on him. I asked him a question instead. What would make this criminal instead of civil? He paused. And his voice changed a little, like a man sitting up straighter in his chair. Proof of ownership, proof of value, proof she had no permission, and that she wasn't a resident with a claim to the property. Documentation, basically. Most folks don't have any. I stood there looking at a brick wall and thought about the folder sitting on my desktop with my grandson's entire bedroom inside it, indexed, time-stamped, photographed, and appraised by a license dealer. Most folks don't have any. I thanked him and I said, "You'll be hearing from me," and he chuckled, the way you chuckle when people say that all the time. They probably do, but I have spent 26 years proving who owns what to people whose entire job is doubting me. Documentation is my first language. My family heard I'd been asking questions before the police department heard a word, which will tell you something about how fast guilt travels in a small county. Wednesday night my Aunt June called, my mother's younger sister, keeper of the family group text and the official family version of events. Junie's got a voice like a warm oven, and she uses it like a pry bar. "Maggie, honey, whatever this is, family does not call the police on family." I told her that a dead man's coat and his father's watch had been sold to strangers off my own porch. She sighed, the way you sigh at a child who won't share. Sweetheart, your sister has got nothing. You've got a whole house and a pension coming. Blood before boxes. There it was again. The family motto, coming out of a second mouth in a different voice, and I finally heard it for what it actually was, not a conclusion anybody had reached, a rule somebody had installed. And then Junie told me the story as she had received it, and I got to hear the official version for the first time. The way she'd heard it, I'd been meaning to clear out that old junk for ages, and Tammy had done me a favor handling the sale while I was on vacation, and now I was twisting a kindness into a crime because I've always been jealous of my sister. I asked her who told her that. Well, your mother, honey. Who else? I stood in Aline's kitchen holding a phone, and I understood that, while I'd been screenshotting listings at midnight, my own mother had been out ahead of me on the phone, telling this family a story in which the woman with the emptied-out grandchild was the villain. They had the story. I had the file. Only one of those holds up in a room where the truth matters, and I was finished spending my life in rooms where it didn't. If you've ever had to buy back your own family's memories from strangers while the people who sold them called it fairness, put it in the comments, because that fall I learned something I'm still turning over. Strangers can be a whole lot kinder than blood. I built the binder over 3 nights at my kitchen table, 1 o'clock in the morning, coffee going cold. Column 1. The 16 listing screenshots with timestamps, every one of them posted within 36 hours of my taillights leaving the driveway. Column 2, my insurance inventory, photograph for photograph, serial number for serial number. The dealer's appraisal on the locomotive, $900, signed. Column 3, the money. My sister's payment app history was public, because Tammy has never made one thing in her life private. Buyer names, dates, little joking notes with emojis in them. All 8 days I was gone, lined up in a row like a confession she typed out herself. Her total take came to $1,180. Then I ran the number that actually mattered. Fair market value, off the inventory and the appraisal, $3,420. I sat back in my kitchen chair at 1 in the morning and I laughed one time out loud, alone, because my sister had committed a felony in the state of Ohio and still managed to sell at a 65% loss. Around 2, I messaged the 4 buyers whose names I could match. Polite. No drama. Just asking whether they'd known the seller. 2 never answered. 1 answered short. And the 4th one answered fast. And what she wrote put a cold line straight down my back. Wait, that stuff was stolen? She'd bought the bookshelf for her granddaughter. And she had something to tell me about the afternoon she came and picked it up. Something she'd seen standing in my driveway that made the whole thing worse. What that woman saw in my driveway was an older man standing next to his truck with Jean's red tool chest in his arms, asking my sister whose tools these had been. And my sister said, nobody's. I'll be honest with you. 16 listings hadn't done to me what that one word did. Nobody's. The woman gave me his name off the pickup thread. Dwight Ferrero, retired iron worker out past Kingston. I called him Friday evening. He'd paid $35. I got about a third of my story out before he stopped me. Ma'am, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He came up my walk carrying that tool chest the way they carry a flag off a casket, and he set it on my kitchen table. I tried to hand him his $35, and he looked at those bills like I'd handed him a parking ticket. A man's tools belong to his boy, he said. That ain't $35, ma'am. That's a will. Then he opened the lid because he wanted me to see he hadn't touched a thing inside. And in the bottom tray, folded in quarters under the socket set, was a piece of graph paper I had never seen in my life. Jean's handwriting, pencil lines, measurements down to the 16th, the whole track plan for the Ohio and Erie, the finish loop, the bridge, the grade, every switch numbered, and along the bottom, in his blocky capital letters, for Charlie. 10th birthday. Don't rush it. He'd drawn out the entire finish. And he'd filed it where any working man files his plans, with his tools. I wish I could tell you the boy bounced back. People love to say that at funerals. Kids are resilient. Here's what resilient looked like at my house that September, with Charlie on an air mattress in my room until I could put his back together. He wet the bed twice, first time in 5 years. Both times he tried to hide the sheets in the bottom of the hamper because he decided that the way you handle loss is you keep it off the grown-up. Then his teacher sent a note home with a drawing. The art assignment had been my favorite place. Charlie had drawn a rectangle, empty. 1 little door in the side, nothing else in it. He titled it my room. His teacher wanted me to know he worked very hard on it and that he'd asked her how to spell empty. I have stood at a counter and told people they were about to lose the family farm to a tax lien and kept my hand steady doing it. At 2 a.m, outside my own laundry closet, holding a wet fitted sheet, I was not steady. He came up behind me in the hallway in his pajamas, and he asked a question he'd clearly been building all week. Grandma, did Grandpa's trains get thrown away because of me? Because I wanted to go to the lake? I sat down on that hallway floor and held my grandson while he confessed to the crime of going on vacation with his grandmother. That was the night the last of my hesitating died. You can call what I'd been doing gathering evidence. Fine, but part of me had still been gathering it the way you hold a card you're praying you'll never have to play. My family had put that math in that boy's head, so I quit praying. Saturday morning, coffee going cold, I finally clicked the 17th listing. The picture had been taken carelessly on my front porch, half the frame washed out by glare off the storm door, and in the middle of it sat the Ohio and Erie, plywood and plaster hills and 61 little basswood timbers glued on by a 7-year-old. $20, cash, sold on the third day I was gone. No buyer name, no profile to message, no thread to pull, porch pickup. The only thing in that entire photograph was in the corner of the frame, reflected in the glass of the storm door. The back end of a pickup truck sitting at my curb. Faded burgundy, a topper on the bed, and a patch of gray primer on the rear quarter panel where somebody had started a repair and quit. That was it. That was everything I had, a $20 train layout and a burgundy truck somewhere in south central Ohio. I printed that photograph anyway, and I put it in the front pocket of the binder, first thing you'd see when you opened it. And then I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I talked to Gene out loud in an empty kitchen. I told him what his sister-in-law had done, which he already knew, and what his mother-in-law had blessed, which he had predicted once, gently, years ago, and which I had argued with him about. And then I made him a promise, and I wrote it down, because that's how I keep promises. I will find every buyer, every single one, and then I'm filing the report. Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I was the first person in the records lobby at the sheriff's office, and I'll tell you, I know what a records lobby smells like. Burnt coffee and floor wax. I know that smell in 3 counties. The deputy at the window flipped through my binder for about 90 seconds. Then he picked up a phone. 20 minutes after that, I was sitting across the table from Detective Rosalind Whitaker, property crimes, reading glasses shoved up in her hair. She went through that binder without saying one word for a long, long time. The kind of quiet that means somebody is actually reading. Then she tapped page 4 and asked the questions that decide everything. Did your sister live in the home? No, ma'am. And I can show you the lease I co-signed on Western Avenue. Did she have permission? Any version of permission? No. Whose name is on the deed? Mine, sole. And I can pull it myself in about 4 minutes because I'm the one who files them. Who owned the property that was sold? My late husband's estate, which came to me, and my grandson, and the inventory and the appraisal in front of you say so, with serial numbers on them. She sat back in her chair. People think family theft isn't theft, she said. It's theft. In Ohio, once you're over $1,000 in value, you're looking at a 5th-degree felony. She ran her pen down my valuation page and stopped on the total. And you're not close to the line. You're 3 times over it. Then she wrote a case number across the front of my folder, and I watched her do it, and it looked exactly like a clerk stamping an instrument into the record, which is to say it looked permanent. You do this at work? She asked. Every day for 26 years, I said. She almost smiled, and then she warned me, and she was kind about it, but she didn't soften it any. I'm going to invite your sister in for an interview. A door like this, once you knock on it, you can't unknock it. I told her I'd stopped believing in that door a while back. Tammy got the phone call on a Thursday, and my family knew what I'd done inside of an hour. My mother didn't yell. Yelling would have meant treating me like somebody she was fighting with. Instead, the house went cold and administrative, and she started communicating with me in announcements. After everything I have done for you, delivered to the coffee maker. I raised you better than this, delivered to the sink. And then Friday came the move, the one my entire life had taught her would work. She stood in my hallway in her robe and announced that she could not possibly keep watching Charlie after school, not for a daughter who treats her own blood like criminals. and she went into her room and shut the door softly, because slam doors are for amateurs. Understand what that meant in actual dollars and actual hours. My mother was my after-school care 3 days a week, plus every day of Christmas break. My whole schedule stood on her being in that house at 3:15. So I signed Charlie up for the IMCA program, $340 a month, and I gave up my Saturday shifts at the flower shop, which was the only reason I had any cushion at all, because now I had to be somewhere on Saturdays, and that somewhere was home. Eileen took 2 pickups a week and never once let me thank her properly. I sat at my kitchen table and redid my budget like a woman diffusing her own life, and I remember thinking, almost calmly, so this is the bill. This is what the last bucket cost. Turns out my safety net had terms and conditions, and the fine print was in my mother's handwriting. That weekend, Tammy texted me for the first time since the empty room. No apology. She wanted to meet, alone. I said fine, and I braced for everything except what she actually said. We met at a coffee place on Bridge Street because she was not coming in my house, and for 45 minutes my little sister explained the world to me. I had to understand how it looked from her side. I had a paid-off house and a pension coming and a kid who has everything. She had nothing. Her marriage was over, her back hurt, her daughter was ashamed of her. And there I was, off on vacation at the lake while she was sleeping on an air mattress. And then she said the line she'd clearly been practicing in the car. She leaned in, sisterly, generous, like she was letting me off a hook. It's just stuff, Maggie. Dead men don't need shelves. Living girls need rooms. And I want you to notice what I noticed right there in that booth. She wasn't lying. That's the thing it took me half a century to understand about my family. Tammy genuinely, all the way down to the studs, cannot tell the difference between needing something and having a right to it. Her whole life, this family has had exactly one law. Whoever needs it most gets it, and she was appointed the neediest one at birth, so that law has never once ruled against her. In her mind, she hadn't robbed a 9-year-old boy. She had carried out a policy. I set my cup down, and I asked her one thing. That pocket watch had Jean's father's initials scratched in the case back. What were yours? She stared at me, and then, because pressure always shows you a person's real shape, she dropped the sister voice and made it plain. If you push this, you lose all of us, the whole family. You think about that. And I did think about it, right there, while she watched me and stirred her drink. She thought she was making a threat. She never once understood she was making an offer. Detective Whittaker called me on a Tuesday. Courteous, exact. The interview had gone about the way interviews go when somebody believes they're untouchable. On the record, my sister explained that yes, she'd sold the items, and yes, the money was spent, but it wasn't stealing because it was family. The file was going to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation. 10 days later, Tammy was served, and my phone turned into a weather event. Cousins I hadn't heard from since Jean's funeral suddenly had extremely strong opinions about loyalty. 2 messages stood out of that whole pile. One from a cousin down in Portsmouth, sent quietly at 11 at night. For what it's worth, she did the same thing to Grandma's ring in 2009. Nobody said a word then either. And one from Aunt June, big bold letters. An invitation. Sunday dinner, her house, the whole family. We are going to talk this out like a family. Bring Charlie. I told her not yet. And I could hear right through the phone how much that answer was not in her script. That same evening, my mother made her last stand at my stove, stirring a pot she had no intention of sharing with me, and said without turning around, "Drop it, Margaret. The prosecutor, the lawyers, all of it. She's your sister. She made one mistake, blood before." And I left the kitchen. I want to be honest about that. I did not stay for the end of the sentence. 58 years old, and that was the first time in my life I ever walked out of a room while my mother was still correcting me. My hands shook for 10 minutes in my own bedroom, like I'd jumped off something high, and then the shaking stopped, and I noticed that something else hadn't started. The something else was dread, and it just wasn't there anymore. Now that dinner was coming for me. I knew that. But first there was a form waiting on my signature. Detective Whittaker laid it on the table in a little room with a loud clock and told me exactly what it was and wasn't. This makes you the complaining witness. Formally, on paper. The prosecutor decides charges, not you. Later, if you want to ask for leniency, you can ask, and they do listen to victims, but you cannot make this disappear once it's in. Take your time, she said. I didn't need time to remember anything. I needed time to cross a line. I wrote out the facts I know by heart, dates, items, values, the locked trunk, the spare key in the junk drawer, the porch photograph. And then my pen stopped over the signature line, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I sat there and watched my whole quiet life go by, every fire I ever smothered so this family could stay warm. Every time keeping the peace got assigned to me like a shift nobody else would take. And I thought, if I sign this, I stop being the strong one. I become the difficult one. There is no road back to the old chair at the old table. And then I thought about a rectangle drawn in crayon with one little door in the side and a 9-year-old boy asking his teacher how you spell empty. I signed it. On my way across the parking lot, I passed a car I knew, Junie's Buick, in the visitor row. My sister in the passenger seat being coached, sunglasses on, at 4 in the afternoon in October. The family machine, rolling. Good, I thought. And that word surprised me with how clean it felt. Let everybody bring their whole strength. I am done being the only one holding back. While the county did county things, I spent my Saturdays knocking on strangers' doors, buying my grandson's life back at retail. The woman who bought the pocket watch listened to the whole story on her porch with her hand over her mouth, then went inside and came back with it and would only take back the $70 she'd paid. It runs fine, just like the listing said. There's a new scratch across the crystal now. Thin, diagonal, the kind you can find with a thumbnail for the rest of your life. I decided to keep it. Some records ought to stay legible. The peacoat had gone to a fellow who collects military surplus, and he handed it back for his $45 and looked sick about it. It came home smelling like somebody else's cigarettes, which is its own particular kind of grief. Your husband's coat coming back from a war it never should have been sent to. Charlie put it on anyway. It came down past his knees. It smells wrong, he said, and wore it through supper. The bed frame and the dresser I lost. That buyer was polite and immovable, and he was legally in the right, and I was not going to become my sister about it, taking things because my need felt louder. The bookshelf came home, the lamp was gone, 2 boxes of photographs gone, and nobody could tell me where. I kept a tally sheet on the refrigerator. 1 column found, 1 column gone. Charlie checked it every single morning like a man reading a fever chart, and 1 line stayed blank week after week, the only line he ever actually asked about. No burgundy truck, no trains. 68 days since that porch photograph, and the trail wasn't cold. It had never existed. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of all that, I came home early and found my sister's car in my driveway. I walked in and found my mother holding my front door open, while Tammy came down my hallway carrying a laundry basket full of something. And my mother said, calm as a crossing guard, she's just getting the last of her things out of her room. Her room. 1 little phrase, and there was the entire future my mother was still building inside her head. The one where the charges evaporate, and the daybed comes back, and my grandson grows up as a guest in his own house. I didn't shout. I stood in that doorway until Tammy set the basket down and left, and she made real sure to slam her car door twice. Then I drove to the hardware store and had every lock in my house rekeyed that same afternoon. My house, my name, my deed, and I know exactly what a deed means because I file them. And then I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and did the thing I'd been circling for 2 months and calling by softer names. I wrote out a 30-day notice to my mother. You can stay with Junie, I said when I put the envelope in her hand. I'll pack you, I'll move you, I'll keep paying for your prescriptions, and I will keep taking you to every appointment you have, but you can't live in this house anymore. She read it twice. Her hand started to tremble, and for 1 second she looked genuinely, terribly old, and I made myself watch that and not take the envelope back. You're putting your own mother out. I'm ending an arrangement, Mom, I said. And you ended it first. You just did it in a 9-year-old's bedroom. At 10 o'clock that night, she knocked on my bedroom door with 2 cups of tea. Let me tell you about my piano, she said. I have seen my mother angry, wounded, righteous, disappointed, mostly in me. I had never in 58 years seen her do what she did sitting on the edge of my bed that night, which was talk quietly with her eyes down, like a witness instead of a judge. In 1969, she was 19 and newly married, and she had an upright piano she had paid for herself, cleaning houses on Saturdays for 3 years. Her brother got behind on something, the way he always did, and her mother, my grandmother, sold that piano out of the front room while Dee was at work, and told her about it that night at supper, in front of everybody. And when my mother cried, one time her mother looked at her across the table and said, "You've got a husband, he's got nothing, blood before boxes." My mother looked down into her tea and said, "And she was right, Maggie." I cried one night, and then I understood what family is. Family is that the strong one carries. I have been proud of that my whole life. And I sat there in my work clothes at 11 o'clock at night and finally saw the whole chain laid out under the lamp. My grandmother's hand on a piano. My mother's tears rationed down to one night. My sister's hand in my junk drawer, feeling around under the batteries for a key. All of it one long relay, and every single runner absolutely certain she was passing along love. "I'm not asking you to forgive your sister," my mother said. "I'm asking you to be strong like I was." And that's when I understood there was no argument to win in that room, because she was not defending what they did to me. She was defending what was done to her. "Strong like you, Mom?" I said. "Or free like neither one of us ever got to be?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up both teacups and went to bed. And by morning she was on the phone telling Junie that I had chosen a pocket watch over my own family. Once the prosecutor's office got moving, everybody's tone changed because the state turned out to be real. Tammy's attorney reached out about what he called a resolution everybody could live with. And here was the shape of it. First offense, no record, diversion program, counseling, restitution, and if she completed everything, the case gets dismissed and sealed like it never happened. But given the family circumstances, the office wanted to know where the victim stood, and a letter from me supporting that would carry real weight. And wrapped around that legal offer came the family's own package, hand-delivered by Junie's voice on my voicemail. Tammy would apologize in front of everybody at Thanksgiving. "Your mother is ready to put this behind us. Everything can go back to how it was, honey." All of it, for one signature. I want to be honest with you about that week, because this is the part nobody believes. I wanted to sign it, not for Tammy, for the how it was. For Sunday dinners where nobody's in a courtroom, for my mother's chicken and noodles at Christmas, with Charlie standing on a chair helping her roll them out, for a family sitting whole around a table with me back in my old chair. And all I had to do was pick up a pen and be the strong one more time. That's the trap they build for women like me. The way out is always shaped exactly like the thing you've missed the most. So put yourself in my kitchen. The letter is one signature long. Your family comes back tomorrow, or your grandchild watches you fold again forever. Which one would you sign? Tell me honestly down in the comments, because I rewrote my answer about 100 times that week. And subscribe, because the dinner where they asked me to my face is what happened next. I finally said yes to Junie's Sunday dinner, and I went alone, because whatever was about to happen in that house, Charlie was not going to watch it. 12 adults, 1 pot roast, 1 agenda. There was an empty chair waiting for me right next to Tammy, which told me the seating had been discussed in advance. Junie stood up before the salad even went around and used her family meeting voice. "We are not leaving this table until this family is whole again." And then they took turns, and I want you to hear what organized love sounds like when it's aimed at you. "She's your sister, Maggie. It's just stuff, Maggie, stuff can be replaced. Your father would be ashamed." That one from an uncle who has not called me one time since Jean died. "Think about Skylar. Think about your mother's health. Think about Christmas." I ate slowly. I said almost nothing, because I'd learned one thing across that long fall. Silence works in both directions, and mine had stopped being the agreeable kind. Tammy cried right on cue, at exactly the right moment, and said she just wanted her sister back. And then my mother stood up, and the table went quiet, because everybody could feel the closing argument coming. She didn't yell. She put both palms flat on Junie's tablecloth, and made the offer that had been her entire life's logic. "I'll take the blame," she said. "I'll tell the prosecutor it was my idea, my permission, all of it. Put it on me. Just save your sister." My mother, 79 years old, offering to lie herself into a courtroom and calling it love. Because it is the only kind she was ever taught. Every face at that table turned to me. I folded my napkin, I thanked Junie for the roast, and I said I'd be giving my answer Thursday morning at the prosecutor's office. And then I left 12 people sitting in a silence I did not fill. Wednesday night, the night before, Charlie padded into my kitchen at 9 o'clock with his negotiating face on. He'd heard more than I thought. They always do. He put his cards on the table. If Grandma says sorry, does everything come back? I told him some of it could and some of it couldn't. He nodded like a little insurance adjuster, and then he asked the real question, the one he'd been carrying around the house for a week. Will Grandma still make the noodles at Christmas? And there it was. 9 years old, and he was already learning the family arithmetic, already calculating how much of his own hurt he ought to quietly eat in order to keep the warm things coming, offering up his own losses first, hoping the people who caused them would keep loving him at that price. And I saw an 11-year-old girl standing at a stove, making sure her little sister had a coat that fit. And I understood, finally and completely, that this was the inheritance. This was the actual thing being handed down in my family, wrapped up in paper that said love on it. And I was the one holding it now, and I was deciding that minute whether to hand it to him. So I told him the truth. I don't know about the noodles, buddy, but nobody gets to take your things and call it fair, not ever again, and you are never going to have to earn what already belongs to you. He thought about that. Then he went to bed, and I sat down and I wrote. And it was not the leniency letter. It was my victim impact statement. 4 short paragraphs, every sentence a fact, not one adjective doing any heavy lifting. Thursday morning, the conference room at the prosecutor's office had a wall clock with a loud second hand, and I got to know it well, because I was 5 minutes early, and the rest of them came in together, which told me they'd met in the parking lot first. The assistant prosecutor sat at the head of the table, tidy man, quick, kind eyes. Tammy's attorney laid out his folders. Tammy sat across from me, pale, no smile anywhere on her. And through the window in the door I could see my mother out in the hallway chairs with her hands wrapped around her purse strap like a rosary, Junie right beside her. There were 2 stacks of paper on that table, and the geometry of them was the whole meeting. On his side, the diversion agreement, counseling, restitution, dismissal, contingent, as her attorney kept just about singing on the victim's support, and the letter itself printed out with a yellow tab stuck on it where my signature would go. On my side, nothing yet, just my hands and the envelope I carried in. Her attorney taught for a while, and he was good, I'll give him that. He said fresh start, he said healing, he said there are no winners here today, he said family about twice the sentence. 1 signature, he said, and slid that letter across the table to me, and this family healed. The assistant prosecutor asked me gently if I understood what was being proposed and told me the office takes victims' wishes seriously in cases like this, and that there was no wrong answer. That second hand went all the way around the clock one time while I looked at the yellow tab. Nobody in that room knew what was in my envelope. My whole family was on the other side of a pane of glass. And, for the first time in 58 years, so was I. I moved the letter aside, squared it up, unsigned, and I set my envelope down where it had been. No, I said, that's my answer, and I'd like it noted that it doesn't come with any anger attached to it. Then I opened the envelope and laid out what I'd brought. My statement and the tally sheet off my refrigerator found and gone in my own handwriting in pencil with a 9-year-old's fingerprints on it. I'm not here for a pound of flesh, I told the prosecutor. I don't need my sister in a jail cell, and I'm not asking anybody to make an example out of a first offender. I'm asking for exactly 3 things. The truth, said out loud in a courtroom, in her own voice, restitution. All $3,420 of it, at whatever monthly rate she can honestly manage, and a condition that she has no contact with my grandson unless I am standing in the room. What I will not do is sign a piece of paper that calls this a misunderstanding. This was a decision, made with a key, over 8 days. Her attorney started to say something, and then thought better of it. Tammy stared at me, and I watched my sister run out of scripts in real time. The sister card, the single mother card, the family card, all of them face up on the table already, all of them spent. They brought my mother in then, her last play. She came around and stood behind Tammy's chair and looked at me the way you look at weather coming. Margaret, she said, blood before boxes. and after 38 years, that sentence finally arrived at the right address. "You're right, Mom," I said. "Blood before boxes. That's exactly why I'm not signing, because there's a 9-year-old's blood in this too, and not one of you ever put him first." The room got very quiet. The prosecutor slid a different form across to me, the one acknowledging that the victim declines to support diversion, and I signed my name for the second time that year in ink that does not come out. Tammy said, low and shaking, "You are not my sister anymore." My mother said absolutely nothing, which from her is a scream. I gathered up my envelope, thanked the man for his time, and walked out of that building lighter and poorer than I have ever been in my life, both at the same time. And I'll tell you, that elevator ride down felt like a boat pulling out of a harbor. 3 weeks later, in a small courtroom with more echo in it than audience, my sister stood next to her attorney and said the word guilty in a voice I had never heard her use, a voice with no performance left in it at all. The plea her lawyer got her was, by any honest measure, merciful. Theft, felony of the 5th degree, 3 years of community control, counseling, restitution, $3,420, payable at $80 a month, no contact with Charlie except with me present, no jail. I never wanted jail. I want to be clear about that. The judge asked whether the victim wished to be heard, and I stood up in my good blouse and read 4 short paragraphs. What was taken, what it was worth on paper, what it was worth at 2 a.m. to a boy who talks to his grandfather's coat, and what a padlocked trunk and a borrowed key tell you about intent, and one sentence at the end that I rewrote more times than all the rest of it put together. I'm not here for a pound of flesh. I'm here for the record, because someday my grandson is going to ask me what his grandmother did, and the record is my answer. Nobody gasped. Real courtrooms don't gasp. The judge thanked me, accepted the plea, set the terms, and moved on to the next case on the docket. And that ordinariness was its own kind of justice. My family's private law, the one where need beats ownership and the strong one eats the loss, overruled in about 4 unremarkable minutes by the actual kind. My mother moved out right on the 30-day line, and I kept every single promise I made in that envelope. I packed beside her for 2 days, her mother's dishes and double newspaper. I carried every box into Junie's spare room myself, and I set her pill organizer up on the windowsill the way she likes it, Sunday on the left. That's the part people don't understand about a boundary. I did not stop taking care of my mother. I stopped paying rent on the privilege of being robbed by her. At the door, with the last box in my arms, she tried one more time, quietly, no audience left to play to. "So I'm nothing to you now?" And I heard the sentence underneath the sentence, the one she'd been handed at a supper table in 1969 and spent her whole life obeying. "Then I'll be nobody's inventory either, Mom," I said. And I put the box down in Junie's hallway and I hugged her, because she is my mother, and she is also the first casualty of the exact thing she did to me. Both of those are true at once, and I've quit trying to make them not be. Then I drove home to my own house, where every lock answers to one key. Mine. The quiet that night was enormous. Charlie asked if we were sad. I said yes, and that sad was allowed, and we made pancakes for supper anyway. Ours were better. The call came the week before Thanksgiving, and it started with, "Ma'am, this is Dwight. Now don't get your hopes all the way up." Dwight Ferrero, it turns out, had never stopped working my case. All those weeks, that retired ironworker had been going to swap meets and flea markets and every train show within 100 miles, drinking bad coffee with old men and describing a faded burgundy pickup with a topper and a gray primer patch on the rear quarter, and at a model railroad show at the fairgrounds in Columbus, somewhere between a table of used track and a man selling boiled peanuts, somebody said, "Well, that sounds like Vernon's truck." Vernon had bought a $20 train layout off a porch in August because his wife thought the plywood would be useful. It had gone straight into his pole barn and sat there through a wet fall. I drove out on a Saturday, and I made myself look at it like a records clerk and not a widow. The plaster hills had crumbled. Mice had been in the newspaper underneath, and mice are thorough. Half the track was green with corrosion. And Jean's trestle bridge, the 61 hand-cut timbers, had been crushed under a stack of storm windows and was in about 9 pieces. But there was a coffee can up on Vernon's workbench. And inside the coffee can, wrapped in a shop rag because even a stranger could tell that one thing in that pile was different from the rest, was the 1948 brass locomotive. Not a scratch on her. Vernon wouldn't take a dime. He looked sick about the whole business, and he helped me load the plywood into my trunk, and he stood in his driveway with his hat in his hands while I pulled out. Charlie came out to the car when I got home. He walked around that ruined layout with his hands behind his back, exactly the way his grandfather used to walk around a down pole, taking his time, saying nothing. "We never ran her all the way around," he said finally. And this time I had an answer that wasn't grief. I went in the house and came back out with a folded piece of graph paper from the bottom tray of a tool chest that a stranger's decency had carried home to us. "Then we're not done, buddy," I said. "Grandpa left us the plan. Here's where everything stood by the middle of January, because I know you want the accounting, and I'm a woman who keeps tallies." Charlie's room came back one paycheck at a time. Walls a deep signal green, which he picked out himself off a chip at the hardware store, taking about 20 minutes to do it. New bed, new shelf. And here is my favorite line item in this entire story. The first $80 restitution check cleared the same week I bought that shelf, which means my sister is furnishing $80 at a time, the room she emptied out. The court calls it restitution. Charlie calls it his shelf. I call it arithmetic, finally running in the right direction. Peacoat hangs on his closet door again. 3 washes in, it's down to mostly fresh air and a ghost of somebody else's cigarettes. The Elgin sits on his dresser, running fine, scratch and all. I never had the crystal polished. Some records ought to stay legible. And on January the 11th, on Charlie's 10th birthday, in a back bedroom in Chillicothe, Ohio, with Aline Prosser and Dwight Ferraro standing in the doorway holding paper plates of cake, the Ohio and Erie line ran all the way around. New plywood, new plaster, a rebuilt trestle bridge with 14 of Gene's original timbers still in it, because 14 of those little basswood pieces were still true, and we built the new ones to sit right alongside them. His cuts and our cuts holding each other up. Charlie ran her 3 times around, and then he stopped her on the bridge, and he blew that little whistle, and he laughed with his whole body, and I let myself hear a promised land 2 years late and right on time. Tammy is 8 months into 3 years of community control. Skylar, by the way, never did move in with her. She stayed with her father in Circleville, which I feel a complicated kind of sad about. My sister still tells anybody who'll listen that I destroyed this family over furniture. My mother still lives at Junie's. I still take her to every appointment. I still pay for her prescriptions. She still believes what she was taught at a supper table in 1969, and she still tells the story with herself as the reasonable one in it. I hear blood before boxes still gets passed around that table like the gravy boat. I'm not at that table. The chain didn't break everywhere. It just doesn't run through my house anymore. Sundays now, it's 2 plates. 3, when Eileen wanders over with something she pretends is leftovers. Nobody at my table has ever once told my grandson what he does or doesn't need. He sleeps through the night again. Took a while. Took the room coming back, board by board, check by check. Here's the one thing I know, now that I did not know in August. A family that only calls you strong while you're carrying them will call you cruel the day you set the weight down. And setting it down where your child can see you do it may be the most loving thing your 2 hands ever get to do. That's my story. 1 empty room, 17 screenshots, 2 signatures I can never take back, and a little brass locomotive from 1948 that finally went all the way around. If somebody in your family calls it fair when they take from a child, protect the record and protect the child in that order, and you'll be all right. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it. Leave your own story down in the comments because I read them. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.